This is going to be a quick video on how I use Smooth-On's Epsilon Pro. If you know what Epsilon is and you just want to see how I use it, you can go ahead and skip to this time code. But if you see any tips that you could add or see me doing something wrong, go ahead and drop a comment down below and I'll pin it or put it in the video's description, because I'm not the foremost expert on the stuff. This is just my technique, and if you don't know what it is or why you might want to use it, then don't skip. Epsilon Pro is a two-part brushable self-leveling epoxy coating that will hold a vertical surface. It'll cure strong to protect the material underneath, and it can be sanded and primed and painted afterwards. It cures at room temperature and doesn't really require a respirator or a fume hood when applying it, but do wear a dust mask when sanding it. So Epsilon will coat your lightweight prop in a protective shell, and it'll also allow you to sand it to a much smoother finish than you can get out of EVA foam or styrofoam. For example, this Nuka Grape Girl jetpack that was XPS foam underneath Epsilon epoxy hard shell. And because it's XPS foam underneath, it only weighs 672 grams or, okay, yeah, I don't need conversion to 23 ounces. So, you know, a pound and a half. And because of the Epsilon, it's much more durable than just bare XPS. I've also used it as a post-processing coating for 3D prints, but Smooth-On does make another product specifically for that called XTC 3D, but I couldn't tell you what the difference is. I just know that Epsilon worked fine for me. Materials you're going to need are your Epsilon Pro. You're going to want some kind of a dye for it. You're going to need mixing cups, various sizes of mixing cups, stirring sticks, very durable ones for the initial stir on these deep bottles, disposable brushes, some plastic plates or tin foil. Timer is a good thing to have. A scale if you're going to measure things by weight, gloves, dust mask for sanding, things to sand with. These sanding sponges will be your best friend. And any other PPE that you might want, like, I don't know, safety goggles, because liability stuff. All right, let's talk about preparations. You're gonna want a decently smooth finish on your piece if you want a smooth finish in the end, because this is gonna save a lot of time sanding the relatively hard epoxy shell later. And have a good handle on your piece, not just one that kind of works or a decent one. I mean a good handle on it, because you're going to need to turn it a lot. Also have a way to set it down and prepare a place for it to cure before starting. So this could be a stand or an eye bolt for hanging, and your curing place should be room temperature. And make sure you dust your workstation to keep that dust from getting into your coating. Prep some scrap pieces in case you mix up too much. You can apply it to your scraps and then use those for practice sanding and painting later. Okay, I think that's all the prep. So let's get into step one. Step one is going to be mixing. You're going to want to measure out your quantities. This stuff mixes up 2 to 1 A to B by volume, or 100 to 44 parts by weight. I'm going to be doing it by weight for extra accuracy. I'm sorry I don't have a way of estimating how much to mix for a project, but if you do, let me know, because I hate wasting materials. So I'm kind of just guessing here. One thing I wish I had been told before I tried this for the first time is that your part B is going to look like it's practically empty, and that's okay. It doesn't look like it's 2 parts to 1 part, but it actually comes out all right, so don't stress about that. I did when I did. Really get that mixed up in there. I like to save as much of this as I can. I think I'm going to shoot for 50 and 22. Now, you know what? We're going to go a little bit more. We're going to go 75 and 33. Now you mix your dye into the part A. And get that good. And wait, part A or part B? Oh boy. Let me check the instructions on that. I might have just done that part wrong. Hold on. Not a big deal. Mix it into one side, but I think one of them is a little bit better. Okay, premix color in part A thoroughly, then add part B. Okay, yeah, I was right. Probably just one drop would have been fine. Now this dye is gonna help determine not only when the two parts are mixed thoroughly, but it's also gonna help you track your coverage on your piece so you don't miss any spots. Definitely don't put that much dye in. This stuff is so strong. I guess that's why they call it so strong. You'll have about 22 minutes to work with this stuff. I start my timer as soon as I pour one into the other, but you could probably wait until after they're mixed. Make sure you scrape the sides real good. Scrape the bottom. Don't worry about air bubbles in this one. We just want to get these really, really mixed. So mix it for a solid minute or more. Oh yeah, there's that smell. The smell of Epsilon. It's a good smell. It's a little bit fruity. Doesn't smell like your 5-minute epoxy that comes out of the tubes. That stuff stinks. This actually smells kind of nice. Now this is going to get poured out into your tray because it's a very exothermic reaction. So if you leave it in the cup, it's going to keep all that heat in and it's going to kick a lot faster. So try to spread it out as best you can. I'm using this plastic plate, but in the past I've used tin foil with the sides folded up into a tray and it worked fantastically. I'm just trying something a little bit new here for the purpose of experimentation. All right. Now we can start applying it using disposable brushes. I always used foam in the past, but I'm going to try these chip brushes, which I generally tend to stay away from because they like to shed bristles, and that's not something that we want. You're going to apply it in very thin coats because it is self-leveling, which means it will slump and drip if you're not careful, but it will hold a vertical surface. Slumps and drips and curtains just make for more sanding later. It's not necessarily going to ruin a piece. And do make sure that you entirely coat your piece, especially if it's XPS or styrofoam underneath or something that will react with like spray paint. When I was doing the Nuka grape jetpack, I think I accidentally sanded through the Epsilon coating, and then when I sprayed my base coat of silver spray paint on there, it completely dissolved the foam underneath, which I managed to fix with some Bondo, but you know, it was still a lot of extra work, and I was just totally gutted when I saw what had happened. Alright, we burned up half our pot life and we're nearly done coating, so I had lots of time left over. Also, a hell of a lot of Epsilon left over. Now that it's completely coated, I'm just going over it all to make sure there are no drips or pools that are going to make sanding difficult later. Okay, first coat done. So I mixed up like 5 times as much of this stuff as I needed to. So I'm gonna have tons to practice on. For what it's worth, this was 75 grams of part A to 33 grams of part B, and it easily covered way more than I needed. This is way, way too much. Way too much. Okay, so I got all that done in 17 minutes. Pretty good, got lots of extra working time, but if you do hit that 22-minute mark and it starts to kick, just walk away because you're not going to make things better, you're only going to make it worse. This first coat needs 3 hours to cure, no more, no less, because it's going to hit a phase called Tacky Phase, which is really important for the next layer to stick. Oh yeah. Okay, so here you can see kind of, well, it still looks runny. It's not spreading very well. It's just starting to get tacky and filmy on the bottom there. All right, here we are 3 hours later. The Epsilon is still, well, can't really say gooey, but it's in its tacky phase where you can see fingerprints will leave dents, but it's not fully, liquid. All right, so the ratio was 100 to 44. Last time I did 75 to 33. I can probably cut it by a third and make that 25 to 11. I actually like the way this plastic plate worked. I'm gonna do that again. I'm only gonna put one drop in. Thank you, foam. I know it's time for me to do another coat. Thank you for alerting me. Remember, thin coats. It's really going to try to lay on a bit thick this time, so try to keep it as thin as possible, or you will end up with slumps down at the bottom edges of everything. Ask me how I know that. Because it's happened. That's how I know. Thank you for asking. People who didn't actually want to know. This gets 16 hours to cure now after the second coat. And then sanding. Here we are, 20 some hours later. I gave it a little extra time to cure because it's a bit cold, but it's all set up, ready to be sanded. And since it's sanding day, we are representing Core Geek and his merch. Not a lot to say about sanding other than these sanding sponges are worth their weight in gold. And they don't weigh a whole lot, but they're good. I'm gonna start with 80 grit. So this is when you're going to be sanding away any fuzzies from the foam, and you're going to be sanding away any slumps and drips that you may have had. I actually did manage to get a drip right here and here, a little bit of a run there. So that's gonna get sanded out. And do take your time with sanding. This is not a very fast process, so just put on some music or a podcast and take your time. You may end up sanding all the way through some corners and edges. Don't worry about that this time because we're going to put more coats on. Okay, all done sanding this layer. It's not completely smooth yet, that's okay. All we were trying to do is knock down any really high points, and then we're also scuffing up the surface because you need this little bit of tooth to get the other layer to stick to it. The first two layers stuck together because one was still tacky and it kind of just made one thick layer. I'll probably end up doing 3 repetitions of the Epsilon, so 6 layers total for this particular piece because I want a really smooth finish on it. But it's up to you to decide when you're done sanding, really, and when you're happy with the surfaces. Here are those test pieces, and because they were laying flat and I didn't really care, I put a real extra thick layer on these. So this is about as much Epsilon as you would have from 4 thin layers. And this is just really 2 thick layers. Yeah, it's got some flex to it. You can definitely bend it and it doesn't crack, but it does crease when you've bent it real good. So keep that in mind if your pieces are going to flex. You're gonna end up with those creases in it. Other than that, it's really durable. You can squish this and it pretty much snaps right back into place. So it'll give you a very good protective finish on your props. So step 5 is going to be repeat steps 1 through 4. All right, this layer is sanded. I've left some of these depressions and pits in it because I'll be doing a 3rd layer for this. If you just wanted to do 2 layers, there's enough material on here to sand this good and smooth, but I want a third, possibly even a fourth, to add some more rigidity to these little spiky bits. Here we are after sanding the fourth layer of Epsilon, and in between the third and fourth layers, I filled some of the more egregious divots and depressions with Bondo. But there are still some depressions that are just not quite sanding down, but they're also not deep enough to fill with Bondo. So I'm going to give it a few coats of filler primer just to work those last few little imperfections out. But at any point along this process, after about the second or third layer of Epsilon, if you're happy with it, then you go ahead and paint it. I am just going to show what can be done to get the smoothest surface possible. Oh, look at that. Goo sounds, goo sounds. Ugh. Yeah. Ooh. Also, your curing space should be bug-free. Looks like this blade's already got its first kill.